Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome back. We're going to be reading chapter 7 in the Essenes, Children of the Light. And of course, this is written by Stuart Wilson and Joanna Prentis. So we are focusing on the Essene communities, and that is what we just read in chapter 6, or the Essenes, actually. I think it was simply titled the Essenes, if I'm not mistaken. That's part 3 that we're reading right now, the Essenes. So we read chapter 6, the Essene communities, and now we're going to read chapter 7, life in the Essene communities. One advantage of moving to the interlife stage was that Daniel was able to review his life from a different perspective. As part of this process, he was able to give us an overview of what it felt like to be living in an Essene community. Daniel. The communities were a balance of families, practical people, teachers, and priests. The priests were respected as the guardians of the rules and ceremonies on which the community was based, but the real authority was the council on which priests and lay brothers had an equal voice. In each community, about a dozen elders, ones chosen from each area of study, played a major part in the council. These elders had the task of hearing the views of all members of the community, and if there was any dispute, arriving at a balance which was fair to all. They also had to bear in mind the rules and aims of the community when reaching any conclusion. Joanna, when we read the Essene texts which have survived to our day, some might think that the priests ruled the communities, and Daniel says indignantly, "The priests do not rule us. We are a free people and rule ourselves. The priests may rule in Jerusalem, but we have chosen a different path. Any position of respect has to be earned. An old and wise teacher or a very spiritual grandmother might carry more weight in the community than any priest, for we would honor their attainment and their wisdom. I may have been an elder, but I had to work my way up to that. There was a great feeling of acceptance of how things were, a contentment with the whole life of the community. We were very reliant on each other, and it was a complete and satisfying system. A number of people in our communities had quite a high focus, and when you're working on that kind of level, people are more balanced and the whole system works better. You sense that your worth is recognized in such a system, but also each recognizes the worth of the community as a whole, so the individual and the community support and reinforce each other, and each is stronger for this. This seemed very significant to us, and we found an echo of it in the motto of the social ethic in Rudolf Steiner's Verses and Meditations. And so that was just a little side note from the author. Daniel, there was a lot of feeling and sensing into how things were, how people were. So if someone was unhappy, you knew right away and did something to help. A very ordered, serene life with just the occasional drama. Right as I said that, there went my phone. You noticed in particularly when you went out into the world and then returned again. You felt the measured rhythm of the community settle around you like an oasis of peace. In comparison, the life in the towns was sharp and uneven, no regular rhythm to it, and very discordant. Most of the teachers traveled from time to time in order to pursue their researches and feel the peace of it enfold us like a comforting and familiar cloak. Joanna, and were the teachers chosen by their star charts? Daniel says yes, and by where their interests lay. Even when young, that would be clear. Joanna, so it was clear when everyone was in the scheme of things? And Daniel says yes. Sorry, I lost my where I was here when I picked my phone back up. So Daniel says, yes, we all knew that different people had different abilities and different parts to play. We could see from the star charts where each one was, so it did away with a lot of jealousy. The strongest and oldest souls had the harder tasks and the more intensive training, and that was accepted. If you got more of the recognition, we knew they had also done more of the work. So we didn't vie with one another, we just got on with our lives. But we were human, so there was a gentle joking about people's foibles, yes. We had a lot of structure, but it was a gentle structure. Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry. I don't know why that keeps happening. Oh, I know why, because I had my bookmark right here and I kept pushing up against it. Okay, let's keep trying with that. I find it funny the times that it's falling and what I'm talking about. Lots of structure, fall. A lot of drama, fall. Okay. So it was a gentle structure because it was arrived at by consent and agreement. The term old soul is used to indicate someone who has many incarnations on the earth and has hopefully acquired wisdom during that time. That's just a side note from the author. Joanna, it must have been very different from the Roman structure. And Daniel says, yes, they had a structure where the top families got most of the rewards, and only a small share filtered down to the rest. We shared everything equally and gave out from the central supply according to the needs of each one. A single person would have different needs to a family, and so on. Joanna, I suppose there were some who came in with quite good charts and didn't live up to their expectations, and others whose star charts weren't so good, but they worked hard and got more responsible positions in the community. And Daniel says, yes, it was a system of rewarding merit. All realized that each was in their position through merit, not simply because they were rich and owned much land or where their family came from, who they were. Our communities were run by the consent of all. Merit, consent, and love formed the inner core on which our communities were founded. All three were necessary if the community was to live in harmony. Joanna, did you choose representatives to speak for you? Daniel says yes. Each section within our community would have someone to speak for them at the council, and the chosen leader of each community would speak at the greater councils held at Qumran. Joanna, and if there were human problems from time to time, the elders sorted it out with discussion? And Daniel says yes, but it was done quietly. If a marriage broke up, it was between the two partners and the elders. No one else knew what caused the rift, and that was wise in many cases. The elders were trusted, and that was enough. The elders were the link to the past, to the clue, to the teachings. Although much was written down, it was also an oral tradition. It was a healthy, harmonious life, but also quite a hard life, quite rigorous if there was much traveling. Yes, traveling was always a little uncertain for us. We were never quite sure whether we would reach the place we had chosen, but that was part of it. We treated it like one of the mysteries. For the traveling outside is linked to the traveling inside, the journey of the heart. Joanna, did you believe that a child is born with original sin? Daniel says, well, there are original parcels of merit, positive merit and negative merit. Each one comes bearing some little gift or burden from past lives, but we did not see it as sin or wickedness, just things to be worked out, lessons to be learned, things to be balanced out in the harmony of the universe. Joanna, so you believe the soul has many lives on earth? And Daniel says, of course. People are born with such different physical and mental abilities. Only by a belief in rebirth can one explain these differences in a logical way. Then one can see the spiritual growth of a soul as part of a just, loving, and harmonious universe. Joanna, I'm beginning to see that the most important things you taught were loving your neighbor within the community, all getting together in harmony and teaching everything with love. And Daniel says, yes, the teachings were given out so that they would lead the people on the path of love. If they knew how to truly love, then they knew all things. We believed that God would preserve all that was important, and the rest would blow away into the sands of the desert. Joanna, I feel there was a great simplicity in your communities. And Daniel says, yes, there was simplicity in our lives, but we did not strive for it. It arose naturally from our lives as the perfume arises from the flower. We strove for good things, peace, harmony, love, truth. Yes, good things. And so even those of us who studied the complexity of the law, the Torah, which was far from simple, he chuckled, through other aspects of living together became well-rounded in simplicity. So a sweet way for us to travel, a sweet path, yes, it was good. My only sadness is I wish we'd been able to share this sweet fruit more widely with others. We shared as much as we could, as much as we dared, and still only a very few, tasted of the sweet fruit. That is perhaps my one sadness, but all ones have their own way and must tread it in their own fashion. Joanna, so you tried not to judge others? And Daniel says, yes, it was not our part to judge anyone. We do not know the pattern that the soul has woven, for we can see only a few threads and not the whole picture. Joanna, what kind of food was eaten in these communities? Daniel says a variety of things. Fish, the meat allowed by Jewish law, fruit, and food from other plant sources. As for myself, I chose to eat nuts, fruit, honey, grains, and other plant foods, but no meat or fish. I did not see why any of God's creatures should have to die so that I might live. Animals are our younger brothers in terms of spiritual development. I do not believe that a loving God would create a universe in which a man must eat his brother in order to survive. And that's very interesting. If you read or followed me when I read Earth's Birth Changes, we talked about this. We talked about, well, what about the animals that actually eat other animals? And apparently, way back when, we're talking maybe the time of Atlantis and Lemuria, animals did not eat meat. They did not eat each other. They did not prey on each other. They ate the same kind of vegetarian diet that people did. It was only through our free will and only through our collective conscious that they became animals of prey and would eat meat. And so originally that wasn't the way it was supposed to go. And we were never meant to eat these large land animals. Fish and chicken, okay, but we were never meant to eat the larger animals. They played a role in a part for a time, and now that role is supposed to be coming to an end where we are not supposed to be ingesting them anymore. All right. Those Essenes who did eat flesh were sparing in the amount of meat they ate, with the exception of those whose path drew them closer to the Zealots. When I visited the community at Mount Horeb, I found our brothers there were eating large amounts of meat, some of it barely cooked, which I found disgusting even to look upon. When I took them to task on this, they said that if they were to be warriors of God, then red meat was needed to strengthen their bodies. Yet even those brothers would not eat the unclean beasts, like the flesh of swine. I did not enjoy my stay at Horeb and returned quickly to my own community. There the fruits were especially sweet, and I never missed meat at all in my diet. Joanna, and did many of the Essenes in your community follow you in your choice of food? Daniel, about a third of those at Hebron and more began to do so when Jesus spoke about food. He said we should eat the fruits of trees, the plants of the field, honey and milk, all the good food spread out before us on the table of the earthly mother. Honey he praised highly, for it is made by the bees with such ritual care, each of their hives being like a temple in miniature, and their lives being ordered with perfect ceremony. Judging by what he said, I believe honey is the most spiritual food one can eat upon the earth. Every community kept hives, and we treated the bees with the greatest respect. Joanna, and by the fruit of the trees, did Jesus mean also nuts from nut-bearing trees? And Daniel says, of course, for this is the fruit of that kind of tree. We grew 2 kinds of nut in Hebron, my favorite being almonds. I ate well of these and often thanked my brother trees for sustaining me. The diversity among the Essenes, and this is the author talking, emerges strongly from this part of Daniel's account. There was no fixed and standard diet, and the food eaten was an individual choice. The documentary evidence does seem to support the view that meat and fish were eaten. The Dead Sea Scrolls contain no general prohibition on the eating of meat and fish, but they do give, in the Damascus document, an instruction on how to treat fish eaten on the Sabbath. And then there is a section titled Concerning the Sabbath to Observe It According to Its Law. I guess that's somewhere in this book. It is difficult to reconcile this piece of evidence with a totally vegetarian diet. The archaeology of Qumran has also contributed to our knowledge. The bones of goats, sheep, lambs, and calves were found in 26 separate deposits on the site. They were carefully buried in pots or covered by pots. In these circumstances, these bones could be either the remains of ritual meals or the result of animal sacrifice. However, several writers of the period, including Josephus, noted that the Essenes abstained from all animal sacrifices, so the ritual meal alternative seems the more likely. And that does make sense, because if there's people that don't want to kill it to eat it because they believe it's also a creation of God and their brothers, why would they kill it as a sacrifice? But let us return to our session with Daniel. Joanna, and taken as a whole, was the experience in Essene communities a very balanced life? And Daniel says, yes, in many ways. We understood that there were many forms of balance which needed to be maintained in order to give a healthy life. The balance between movement and repose, for example, was present in the exercise for the body, in practical work in the fields and gardens, and in dance. Joanna, and there was a form of Essene dance? And Daniel says, of course. Our teachers told us that dancing was an essential balancing factor, especially for those of intense spiritual aspiration. We had slow, gentle dances and fast, vigorous ones. Sometimes when we had lost someone in the community who was greatly loved, we could only come to terms with that loss when we had a gathering with many dances. Being able to move all of us together in slow, reflective dances, thinking about the one who was no longer there physically present, made it easier to bear the loss of a much loved friend. And then here we have just a little ending, little few lines from the author. There was a strong tradition of dancing in groups, especially in lines, throughout this whole region. This tradition would have been established for many centuries before the Essenes. And so it is not surprising that this practice continued in the Essene communities. We can see echoes of these dances in those developed within the Israeli kibbutz movement. The dances pioneered in this movement have now gone out to a much wider audience as Israeli circle dances. All right, so that was chapter 7, and in the next chapter, we're going to read about the children in the Essene communities. And let me take a look at that chapter. I do think it's a little bit too long. That was the chapter right there, but I'm trying to see what chapter 9 looks like. Yeah, I will save chapter 8 and 9 and read those together because they are shorter. And I will leave the chapter 7 on its own since we're almost at the 20-minute mark. So we'll go ahead and stop right there. I'm filming this on Thanksgiving, but I'm pretty sure I'll be posting this the day after. So if you celebrated, if you did not, either way, I hope that you had a really blessed day and that every day you remember your blessings, no matter how little or how big they may be, no matter how few or how many. When you start to make that list of gratitude, things to be grateful for in your head, it's funny the things that you can come up with and realize that you're actually grateful for. So if you've never done that, think about making a gratitude list and see how many you can come up with. And you might struggle, but you'll find more and more to add to that list. And it really does. Gratitude makes a huge difference. And I realize that sometimes it is easier in life excuse me, to find gratitude than it is at other times. If you've lost somebody that you love recently, if you're struggling with illness or disease, or a loved one is, if you're going through really bad financial times, or, struggling with finding a place to live or a job, whatever the case may be, there are always things to be grateful for, and staying in a grateful heart will bring those things to you. Just remember that, even when it's tough. So with that being said, I hope that you all are doing well. I love you all so much. And until I see you again, take care of you. Take care of those around you. Bye-bye until next time.